Welcome back to another lecture. This is about criticism we'll be having. So, this is the lecture 4 of this series. The critical writings forming the critical discourse in Arabic is a very significant topic related to Arabic language and literature. In all the phases of history, because it plays the critical analysis, the critical discourse, the critical vision, the parameters, the standards which are applied for appreciation, for reading, for analysis, for appreciation of any literary text, whether it is poetry or it is prose. There are some well-defined parameters, well-defined ways and standards, methodologies which must be applied, which must be adhered to while appreciating, while dealing with a poetic or prose, that is literary phenomenon. The an-naqd, the criticism which is known as an-naqd in Arabic, it's having its sources, the primary structure from which it draws the themes, the concepts, the parameters. In the long history of Arabic literary and critical enterprise, we have the Greek background, which is known as al-Marja'iyat al-Yunani, al-Masadir al-Yunaniya, that starts with the translation of the Greek literary text alongside the philosophical and the medical text of medicine and sciences. Here chiefly we'll be finding Kitab al-Shi'r and Kitab al-Khataba. Kitab al-Khataba by Aristotle, primarily Greek sources. Then of course we'll be having the sources drawn from Jahiliyyah. Very critical vision that never departed, never was separated from the ambit of the literary enterprise or the poetic enterprise in Islam or before Islam, in the domain of Arabia. Again, if the appreciation of the study of the appreciation of the poetic lines was not something like it had no rules or regulations. It came out of nothing. It was simply something like the subjective outbursts or in subjective preferences, likes or dislikes, without any valid or solid reasons. So there were certain rules and regulations, and these norms are seen in application in all the poetic gatherings we find during the pre-Islamic period, whether it was the Suqi, Ukaz, or Zul Majaz, or Majna, or Arafat, the poetic gatherings, in the backdrop of which we find the case of Muallaqat especially coming to the fore. Then the Critical initiations we find during the Umayyad times in all these three schools, that is the Al-Hijazi school and the school of specific persons like Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, alongside the specific institutional or what at a later stage led to be institutionalized, especially in the persona of the Qurra, of the Huffaz, Abu Amr ibn al-Ala, Yunus ibn Habib, etc. So these are related to the Umayyads alongside the ulama of Balagha, the rhetoricians in the history of Islam, rhetoricians, al-Balagha, like As-Sakkaki, al-Jurjani, Abdul Qahir al-Jurjani, As-Sakkaki, and others, and the Kalami parameters, which had played a role in the formation of the critical vision, critical aptitude, and critical methods in the grand critical khitab, al-khitab al-naqdi, or discourse, the critical discourse of Arabia. Then we'll be having madaris, schools of thought, schools of thought. So we find that among the first books of literary criticism or in the very primary literature or the literary domain, emergence of the literary domain related to criticism, the translation movement has played its role. Translation movement actually had so many parameters, so many aspects, so many domains. One domain, one aspect was related to the study of language and literature, study of literature, study of poetics. And in this context, the book that had played a very significant role in the literatures of the East, and where of course we are confined to Arabic, it was Aristotle's Poetica. The Poetica and Rhetorica of Aristotle were translated into Arabic. We have several translations, like translation of Abul Walid ibn Rushd, Ibn Rushd's translation. Here we have another translation which was done during the Abbasid times, that is translation of Abu Bishr Matta bin Yunus, Abu Bishr Matta ibn Yunus. So this is the translation of Abu Bishr Matta bin Yunus, and this is the translation of Ibn Rushd. This is a folio of Abu Bishr Matta bin Yunus' translation, which is preserved in Paris, a folio of the manuscript. Alongside, of course, other translations which were done during the Middle Ages, and of course the translations which have been done in modern times. So in a nutshell, we can say that in the formation of the critical views, as in part in line with the methodological standardization or process of methodological standardization of the critical enterprise dealing with the text, the thoughts of Greek theorists, philosophers, chiefly Aristotle, via translation had played a significant role. The Kitab-o-Sha'r of Aristotle had some modern translations, as it has been referred to. We have the translation of Ihsan Abbas, we have the translation of Abdurrahman al-Badawi, we have translation of Shukri Ayyad, we have also translation of Ibrahim Hamada. We also have some translations of of Shariat of Aristotle in Urdu. It is well known. In the critical discourse domain, we have the foremost figure of Quddama ibn Ja'far in his two grand books. First is Naqd al-Sha'r and the second is Naqd al-Nasr. So that actually gave a celebrated a phase of critical analysis or the very intellectual framework, very thought paradigm, structure, standardization of the thought of critical concept of critical analysis, critical appreciation, or the very act of reading in modern, rather postmodern parlances. That is how to read a poem, how to read a text, how to appreciate it, how to analyze it. These themes were deliberated upon by the Arab critics like Qudama ibn Ja'far in two of his books, Naqd al-Sha'r and Naqd al-Nasr, during the Abbasid times. Ibn Rashiq al-Qairwani Qairwan is a city in modern Tunisia. His كتاب العمدة في نقد الشعر وتمحيصه. كتاب العمدة في نقد الشعر وتمحيصه. This is a very significant book, having the very title of the critical analysis, the title that speaks about the very job the author has embarked upon, that is Kitab al-Umda. As before that we have seen Naqd al-Sha'r wa Naqd al-Nasr, where the word Naqd happens to be part of the title. The third very prominent figure is that of Hazim al-Qartajin. Hazim al-Qartajin. His Minhaj al-Balagha wa Siraj al-Udaba. Significantly, this book has been identified in the backdrop of that discourse or debate as whether modern or postmodern critical paradigms are connected in any way, in any method, by the classical writers or writings on criticism, like the structural theory, al-Bunyawiyya, or the at-Tadawuliyya theory, that is the pragmatic theory, the pragmatic paradigms, the pragmatics as applied to the study of language and literature, which is primarily a linguistic concept, but of course related to language and literature. So yes, Minhaj al-Balagha wa Siraj al-Udaba has been primarily related to structuralism and pragmatism. That is like some postmodern concepts being did upon by the medieval theorists, medieval critics. We have all talked about the Jahiliyyah, Islamiya, Umayyah sources. Who are the primary nuqad? Who are the primary nuqad? As we have seen, these peoples. First, there were the historians who dealt with the themes of history, who wrote book about the literary history of Arabia. Literary history of Arabia. They are the Mu'arrikhu al-Adab in the history of Islam and Arabia. The general writers, al-Kuttab, the peoples of Balagha, rhetoricians, the grammarians represented by both Basra and Kufa schools, as we have seen, al-Mantiqiyin, the logicians, the philosophers, men of letters, alongside specific nuqad. The very prominent names we'll be finding during the Abbasid times is Ibn Salam al-Jamahi, related to Mu'arrikhu al-Adab. In his book that is Tabqatu Fuhul al-Shu'ara, Tabqatu Fuhul al-Shu'ara. This is the first ever history of Arabic language and literature in the history of Islam. Then Ibn al-Mu'taz, who was a caliph, his book that is Tabqat al-Shu'ara. Among the al-Kuttab and also al-Udaba, we have the personality of al-Jahiz in his al-Bayan wa Tabeen, Kitab al-Hayawan. Also Ibn Qutayba, Adab al-Katib, al-Shi'r wa al-Shu'ara. Ibn Rashiq al-Qairwan we have already discussed. Qudama ibn Ja'far we have already seen. Abu Hilal al-Askari, Kitab al-Sana'atain, Kitab al-Sana'atain fi Shi'r wa al-Nasr. So this is again something like a manual of literary criticism, because these Sana'atain, these two like industries or enterprises, tasks, craftsmanship are related to the art of poetry and art of prose. Al-Amudi, Al-Muwazana Bain al-Ta'iyin. This is the first example in Arabic of the comparative criticism, the applied criticism. Ibn Jinni, Sirru Sina'at al-I'rab. Ibn Jinni, Sirru Sina'at al-I'rab, who had discussed some aspects of the phonetics, phonology, semantics, etc., the linguistic aspects related to Arabic. Interestingly, Sirru Sina'at al-I'rab has been related to some postmodern concepts of the semiotic theory, like semiotic theory in postmodern concept of, related to the postmodern concept of language and literature. I've talked about Hazm al-Qartajini, Al-Husri al-Qairwani, also Sahrul Adab, Yaqut al-Hamabi al-Rumi, that is Mu'jam al-Udaba, etc. So these are the very primary and significant specimen examples of critical analysis in as were developed during the Abbasid times. This should be seen not in isolation of the critical approaches represented by the al-Balaghiyin, the ulama of Balagha, like Abdul Qahir al-Jurjani, al-Sakkaki, Ibn Tabataba, al-Alawi, and others. The significance of these actually lies in the fact that when we talk about the critical the history of Arabic literary criticism, we'll be finding that in terms of the schools, we find that the first school was the school of the classicists, who actually related themselves more and more to the pre-Islamic and early Islamic paradigms. And then the second group, which is represented by those who were very much enthusiastic about that literature which was available to them through translation, literature of the Greek philosophers, logicians, and men of letters, of course, like or the theorists on language and literature, alongside the philosophical themes, like Aristotle in his Poetica and Rhetorica, Kitab al-Shi'r wa Kitab al-Khataba, Talkhis al-Khataba. Significantly, these two books had played a very significant role in formulating the critical paradigm the theory of language and literature and poetics, how to understand poetry during the Abbasid times. And with this, in the backdrop of this, we find that a sort of imbalance had appeared in the Arabic literary arena, where we have the Balaghiyin Qudama, the classicists, and we have we can say they were the modernists of that time. So in order to strike a good balance, we find the Balaghiyin, Ulama al-Balagha, Abdul Qahar al-Jurjani, As-Sakkaki, Ibn Tabatab al-Alawi, and others playing very significant role, and restoring the things to like proportionate thinking and practical balance, where the alien Greek parameters of language and literature, while applied to Arabic poetry, understanding of Arabic poetry and prose, there should not be any gap or absence of the traditional literary taste, where because of the new light, some new concepts like the very concept of catharsis, as we find in the Poetics of Aristotle, how could we relate it to the Arabic poetics? Of course, poetry plays a role. It has the role of catharsis. It has the aesthetic role to play. It has the actual effect, because poetry is not something that exists in a void. So they have their social role, they have their psychological role. But when it comes to the structure, outside the structure of poetry, al-binya, al-lafzi al-ishar, so we find that there's a huge gap between the Arabic poetry and the Western poetry, that is the Greek poetry of the time. So if we apply the rules as we extract from Aristotle's Poetics, this application might be posing some serious issues, often creating an imbalance, a sense of imbalance. So this was primarily addressed by the Balaghiyin. So that's why we find that the Balaghiyin in this sequence have played a balancing act while dealing with the critical discourse or discourse of criticism. With this, we come to the end. Thank you.